Welcome back to another episode of Adeptus Paternus. The kids are finally asleep, so we can talk about Warhammer. Joining me to discuss the third Grotmas detachment is my local group's resident Tyranids player, Brian, who has to appear off screen because his godly countenance is just so overwhelmingly magnificent to behold that it would melt our audience's faces off if they caught but a glimpse of his glory. Also, he doesn't have a webcam. Welcome, Brian. Are you ready to talk about Tyranids?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So I have the PDF up. Should have asked you before, but do you, or should I just read out the rules and then you discuss?
You can read them out. That's fine with me.
All right. So the first one, the detachment rule. There's going to be a theme here for those of you who haven't looked at it. Tyranid warriors and winged Tyranid prime units have a 5-up invulnerable save. Um, that's useful, right? Do they
Yeah,
have?
it's definitely pretty good. I think one of the main problems with Tyranid warriors and Tyranid primes, especially, is their durability right now.
Mm-hmm. What is their? Because I'm not so familiar. What is their sort of baseline defensive profile look like?
They're toughness 5. They have a 4-up save, and they have 3 wounds each.
Oh yeah, that's. The 3 wounds part can be annoying if you don't have the right damage for it, but 4-up does not do much. So having that 5-up invul actually is definitely significant because I imagine there's a lot of situations where you just don't have a save.
Yeah, even with cover, there's a lot of guard tanks or Tyranid mirrors or whatever. AP3 is there.
Yep, yep. So yeah, obviously, if you're going to be running a lot of warriors, which is what this detachment wants to do, not having them just keel over at the first sign of decent AP is a good thing. Uh,
Definitely. I think that a lot of Tyranid stuff. I didn't play previous editions really, but in this edition, there's a lot of like overlapping auras and things like that you can set up. And I
mm-hmm,
think the invulnerable from this, plus the other auras you can have, whether it's stealth or cover or feel no pain from a psychophage or something, you can start
sure.
stacking enough stuff to where they actually can do something.
Yeah, I guess the psychophate because that's a 6-up, right?
Correct.
Which doesn't. It's not great if you're just dealing with like a bunch of like one wound termagants or whatever. But when you get to 3 wounds, that's when it starts to become like, okay, let's say it's a damage to your weapon. Well, you have a pretty like a 50-50 chance, right, that one of them like is going to survive on one
Yeah.
wound, and that's like not insignificant.
Yeah, I definitely think that especially if you have exact damage. Damage 3 isn't that common, I would say, but it's common enough. But
Sure.
you start invulnerable saving a couple, and then you split the attacks in half. The
Oh yeah.
damage output is a lot lower.
Yeah, definitely. And then damage 2 is already inefficient. I don't know if the 6-up feeling of pain is as effective there, but yeah. Well, moving on though, there is a sort of buried deeper in this detachment rule is the fact that they talk about what the keywords are that Tyranid warriors get battle line, and also they have an OC characteristic of 3, which again is pretty helpful if you're going to be running mostly this stuff as the detachment wants you to do. The fact that you're not sacrificing your OC game to do it is, I think, a big boon.
Yeah, for sure. I think that Tyranids, one of the advantages they have in this edition is lots of idiots with 2 OC and that move
Mm-hmm.
fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to be bringing lots of warriors and not a lot of other battle line, they need to have more OC.
Yeah, definitely. I guess when as we get through all of it, we can determine how killy this is. But yeah, it's like you got to have either one of two things. Ideally, you want to have both, right? But you have to either be able to kill off of an objective, or just hold it through sheer OC. But if you, I mean, in general, Tyranids are not the most killy, so they kind of do, I think, rely on having, at least some extra OC to help out with that.
For sure. And there are some tricks in the detachment they put in,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the strats or the enhancements.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the enhancements. The first one, Synaptic Tyrant for 10 points. A Neuro Tyrant can be attached to a Tyranid Warriors unit. What?
Yeah, I think this is okay for 10 points, maybe. I think the biggest problem is that you're always going to be running into the problem where the Neurotyrant is a monster model, and so it can't
Mm-hmm.
walk through walls. So maybe you put it with ranged warriors to give them +1 to hit because they hit on fours.
Right.
And then the +1 Neurotyrants give +1 to wound against battle shocked models too, so that could be okay, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose even if you're not like really leaning hard into trying to force battle shock tests just on the off chance, with Shadow of the Warp, that you get that extra. I think it's like a kind of bonus more than something that you plan around in this particular attachment, right?
For sure, yeah, I would say it's just a bonus. You're never really going to reliably do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get I guess the thing is though, the way you have to think about it is, would you be taking a Neuro Tyrant anyway? If you are, then sure, like take this, but it's not just 10 points really, it's like 115 points for the package. is
Yeah,
is that 115 points really worth the buff? Because that's kind of expensive for a leader that just gives you like +1 to hit, maybe +1 to wound.
yeah. I mean, he has a lot of ablative wounds, which is nice, and a flamer, of course. I
Yeah.
actually think that this is kind of counter synergistic, like you're saying, because one of the big advantages to Neurotyrants is they can put the 18-inch synapse out, and if you're
Mm-hmm.
running, 30 warriors, then you don't need synapse anywhere because it's going to be all over the place. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how, in your experience, how useful is that whole during the Shadow of the Warp, subtracting -1 from the battle shock test? Like, is that a thing that like is very important, like impactful?
yes, I would say it's impactful. The biggest thing is that um, because you get the -1 from the Neurotyrant being on the board, and then you get -1 when what's one of the new FAQ things, the -1 when you're in synapse range too.
Mm-hmm.
You're at -2 to the roll, and so there's other ways to like there are other things you can do to like lower leadership as well. So you can you can't guarantee it obviously, but a Space Marine unit that's normally a 6 whatever going to an 8 is actually pretty good.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm like, if I were to see this, I wouldn't be like shocked, but it
Yeah,
doesn't
no,
it
I
doesn't
think
sound
the
like an auto include or anything.
yeah, I think this is the worst of the enhancements is
Yeah.
this one.
Sure.
If you really wanted to include the unit, basically, you could do that, but I wouldn't see it happening very much.
Sure. All right. Next one. Ocular adaptation for 20 points. A winged tyrant, winged Tyranid prime only. Each time a model in the bear's unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll.
Yeah, this one is actually good, I think, because I mean, melee warriors hit on threes, so now they're
Mm-hmm.
hitting on twos, and they have an ability that lets them reroll ones.
Yeah.
So you're definitely getting a lot of stuff through.
Yeah. That, I mean, the fact that you can combine those two, that makes it pretty efficient. So
Yeah,
I could, yeah,
and
that I could definitely. I mean, that actually becomes, the thing about situations like that. Like, once you reach that point of um, hitting on twos, rerolling ones, it's something that you can start to much more consistently predict what's going to happen, and so you can be more precise about how you allocate your resources, and that is actually a big advantage because often you don't have like tons of options for where you can put stuff, and so like knowing that, like, okay, yes, nine like 90% of the time this is going to be effective versus like 75% of the time is actually can be fairly significant just in the planning stage.
for sure, I think one of the biggest challenges to at least learning Warhammer for me so far has been figuring out how much you actually have to allocate to things.
Right.
And it's kind of like card games and everything else. I mean, it is a dice game after all, but being able to figure out what your variance is and like how much you
Mm-hmm.
actually need to put on something really makes a big difference.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's it's something that people math it out, but they always look at like averages and they don't look at distributions. And
Yeah,
yeah, but that can be a whole separate topic.
sounds like a good plan for a video.
Yeah. Moving right along, another Wing Tyrant Tyranid Prime, another 20-point one. This one, though, is each time an attack targets the bearer's unit, subtract one from the hit roll. Now, this is both ranged and melee. So it's not stealth. It is better.
Yeah, slightly better, I would say. I think this actually would be one that you would. I mean, you could do it on a warrior. It makes them slightly more durable.
Sure.
But it would be kind of interesting to put it on a winged prime that has gargoyles attached,
Mm-hmm.
because while they're move blocking, they're slightly more difficult to kill. So
Now that actually does make sense because I mean, especially because like this detachment, you can't bring them back. You probably want to, but is it really worth the 20 points and then also attaching a character to the gargoyles? I don't know.
yeah, it's hard to say. I would say probably not, but
Yeah,
it is interesting at least.
yeah, yeah. I feel like this is another one of those which like I don't think you're gonna see too often simply because it's not something where it's just like, oh yeah, like you're already taking the character, so if you happen to have the points, just you may as well slap it on.
Yeah,
You would,
exactly.
yeah, you'd be building around this, and I don't think it's worth building around.
I
All right,
think that Ocular adaptation and the next one we're going to talk about are the ones that really
yeah,
will see use.
definitely. Yeah, the third one, elevated might for 30 points. This is any Tyranids model. The bear's unit is eligible to declare a charge, well, advance and charge. Now, all advance and charge is good. I personally like advance and charge strats so that you have some flexibility, where you're going to be applying it. Um, but getting it in as an enhancement is plenty good,
Yeah,
especially when you have like hard hitting melee units like the Tyranid warriors with the well melee. They need better names on these
yeah,
melee
they're kind of
warriors.
awful. The this is definitely solves another problem for melee warriors. It's which is actually connecting to the unit you're trying to get to. Move
Mm-hmm.
6 on a 50 millimeter base, and especially if you have 6 warriors plus the prime, so they have to be within range of 2 of them.
Yeah,
It's really kind of challenging sometimes to get them into combat.
yeah. No, I've been there. I mean, I play mostly Necrons, and we have God, why am I playing the Scorpec destroyers who are also on kind of a big base, and
Yeah,
they also like they move a little bit fast. I mean, I guess Tyranid warriors they only move what 6 inches.
6 inches. Yeah,
Yeah. So and I think the Scorpecs off the top of my head I think they move 7, but like it's it's hard to stage that many bases safely, right? Like
for
to
sure. Yeah,
and when they're that size. Um, but if you can advance and charge, that really it does make it worth. And obviously, I think you would want to do it for 6 because you want to maximize the efficacy of this.
for sure. I think the fact that this is Tyranid's model and not Tyranid warriors or warrior prime is kind of interesting. You could put this on a hive tyrant with tyrant guard, or you could put this in a gene stealer unit
That's
that's
yeah,
supporting. So
yep. I mean, would it? Do you think that would be worth it? On a hive tyrant. Like, I mean, do you see a
Um,
place for a hive tyrant in this detachment?
I mean, yeah, I think it's nice to have ranged lethals. I think there's a kind of a trap with the way this is set up in that you kind of either need to go a lot like a ton of warriors or go kind of half and half. And I think Hive Tyrant would be in the half and half one at least.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that like there are some people who look at this and say, "Oh, like this is lame because it only buffs warriors, and so all you're gonna see is just warrior spam." And I think that that's like the like naive way to approach it, and I say that
Absolutely.
not like as a an insult, but just like the naive is in the terms of on first blush, on first impression. Actually, the way to run a lot of these things is, yeah, you maximize the efficacy of what gets buffed, and then you just take good data sheets that are good on their own, that can perform roles that the main pieces that are being buffed aren't performing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially with warriors, I mean, the melee warriors are definitely the best um, version. The ranged ones are very cheap, but they are kind of awkward when they're hitting
Yeah,
on fours by
yeah,
base. But melee warriors do well when they get into stuff, and if you take, some of the efficient guns like exocrines, which are probably one of the most efficient shooting platforms in 10th,
yeah.
and you just kind of shoo them in there with some of the strats that are available, I think that's definitely where you see the most competitive like setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that is it is nice to have just an efficient shooting piece. Like, it's kind of funny because they're in some ways similar to like Forge Fiends that way, where in the very beginning of the edition, nobody was taking Forge Fiends with World Eaters, thinking, well, they don't get any buffs in World Eaters. Why would I ever want to do that? And now you see it all over the place just because having that little bit of shooting to round out, the melee threat so that people do still, they can't just position wherever they want, knowing that they're not going to get shot at. So even if it's not as good as like the buffed version, it's still it's still very useful.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the big things about, I mean, at least in this regard, not necessarily competitive generally, but um, is you need to keep people honest. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're playing even a decent player who looks at your army and says he doesn't have any shooting, they're just
Right.
going to walk right out in your face and you're going to be
Yeah.
hosed.
Yeah. I mean, it means that they can put complete like trash on an objective out in the open, and knowing that like, okay, all I have to do is just screen you out of it. So
Yeah.
yeah. So would you? I guess we can maybe go through all the strats first, and then I'll get to my question.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So moving on to the strats. Every single one of these is 1 CP. The first one's synaptic amplification in the shooting or your shooting or the fight phase. Uh, a Tyranids unit that has not been selected to shoot or fight. So it is nice that you can use this on anything that's just a little bit better if it's a warriors unit.
Kind of.
Kind of.
This one's a little bit awkward, but
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward, so I'm actually going to read it out entirely just so I don't get it wrong. So, if the unit is a warriors unit, you can select an endless multitude unit from your army that is not battle shocked within 6 inches of it, referring to the warriors unit. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in those units makes an attack, reroll a wound of 1, and if it's a warriors unit, reroll a hit roll of 1 as well. So,
I think so.
this
The
is
thing
worded
here,
very weirdly.
it is extremely weird because, and partially because you can target two different things basically. If you have a warrior unit next to a regular chaff unit like Termagants, you target them both, and they both
Right.
get the benefits, which can be good.
Sure. But you
One of the big things though is that, like, let's say if you were to use this in the fight phase, I mean, Tyranid warriors already reroll hits of 1. They have the ability to. They can
yeah.
change their ability over to rerolling armor saves of 1, which is okay, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's not that useful.
Yeah.
And then the shooting variant, if you're going to use it in your shooting phase, the shooting variant you'd probably target endless multitude with would be most likely Termagants. And the
Mhm.
way really competitively to run those right now is with a twin linked pistol, so you're going to be rerolling the wound anyway.
Right.
So this one is a little bit awkward, I would say, amongst the strats.
Yeah. So probably not. It's funny because like you would think, oh, something that gives you reroll wounds of 1 and reroll a hit roll of 1, like you could use that all over the place, but Doesn't sound really like it actually has much purchase.
Yeah, I think the place it's kind of like I was saying, it's a little bit of a bait to think about it just in the warrior and or endless multitude
Yeah.
direction. Where this actually is good is on something like Zoanthropes standing next to a hive tyrant or whatever. Um, in that, like let's say the blast profile is wounding something on a two and you're
Mm-hmm.
rerolling ones. That's where you start to gain a lot out of it actually. Like we talked about before, you're just reducing variance, and that's where you want to get it from, I think.
I mean, I guess so. If I'm understanding this correctly, if you're just targeting neither a warrior's unit or an endless multitude unit, you still can just re-roll a wound roll of one.
Yeah,
Any
exactly.
anybody can do that,
Yes.
and so that's not bad if you are, just for your like exocrines. Like
Yeah,
if you
or
really are
Tyrann
just
effect.
like, yeah, if you just wanted to get a little bit more damage in and you have the CP.
Yeah, and there are some things where like it really will matter. Like if you're shooting a Tyrann effects and it bounces and it's a real
Right.
problem, then yeah, this is where you want to
Yeah, I
give it
guess the
to.
Tyrannifex. Yeah, because like there's a lot of situations where Tyrannifex is wounding on a two,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
with like not very many shots. So like maybe you just really want to. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah, I think that's what probably that Tyrann effects, exocrines, of course. Maliceptors, it's nice because you're wounding a lot of chaff and even
Right.
Terminators on twos. But I think the other place though, the blast profile on Zoanthropes,
Yeah.
it's very good if you're rerolling the ones because you're
Mm-hmm.
rolling a lot of dice anyway.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure to clean up those units. Like against, for instance, Black Templars, bricks of Primaris guys.
Yeah.
Definitely want to clean up as many of those as you can. So
Yeah. Yep. Clint isn't here to defend himself.
good.
All right, spontaneous hypercorrosion, another one that's either the shooting phase or the fight phase, and another just it can be any Tyranids unit as the target. So until the end of the phase, add 2 to the strength characteristic of ranged weapons, and add 1 to the strength of melee weapons equipped by Tyranid warriors and winged Tyranid prime models. So
I really
that's
like this one. This
yeah. I
is
mean, it's like
excellent.
it's weirdly written, and it's kind of like a strange choice, but like when you actually just break it down, it's pretty good.
Yeah, you're basically just it just says +2 strength to your gun or +1 strength in melee, which the +1 strength in melee is less good for a lot of things, but
Totally.
the 2 strength in range hits a million breakpoints. Exocrines go from 9 to 11.
Yeah, that's huge.
Um,
That's
zone,
huge.
yeah, Zone Throw Blast goes from 7 to 9, which starts wounding a lot of things.
Yep.
And then, exocrines go to 20, which means they wound, what is it, T10 vehicles on a 2 instead, which is
Yep.
nice. And you
Mm-hmm.
can combine this with the previous strat really to make it probably the best, where you're
Yeah.
suddenly wounding on 2s and then you're rerolling the 1s anyway.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I that's like one strength is often not really enough to be exciting, but two strength really does. Even with 10th edition having this like wider toughness scale, that does hit a lot of. I could actually see this as being something, and I mean this is we were talking about how you would want to take shooting platforms even without buffs, but I mean this is just a great shooting buff.
Absolutely, yeah. And because, especially when we talk about exocrines, going from 9 to 11 and then being already really efficient, it's an extremely good. And then you can even, like I said, you can pack in the synaptic amplification one to reroll ones to wound. If
Mm-hmm.
you're wounding Terminator units if you're hitting them on twos because you didn't move, you're wounding them on twos, rerolling ones, you're suddenly like actually picking up the entire
Yeah,
unit instead
yeah,
of
yeah.
just leaving one or two behind.
Now that actually becomes super scary. Like especially to me, I have, I mean, two of my. So usually when I face exocrines, I'm like not terribly scared of them because like strength 9 like doesn't bother. Like you're still wounding the Silent King who's toughness 10 on fives, but all of a sudden if you're wounding him on threes, that is
Yeah, that's a
very
big
annoying.
swing. That's a 33% swing or whatever it is, 34%. It's actually
Yeah,
huge.
it's huge. It's huge. I mean, yeah. So that I think people kind of wrote this detachment off, but just being able to buff like an already a very good shooting piece that far is very nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this stratagem in particular, plus it combined with the previous one,
Yeah,
actually kind of carries a lot of weight here.
yeah. All right, the next one, which is less exciting.
Actually,
Um,
wait 1 second before we go to the next one.
sure.
One thing that is interesting about that one specifically is sometimes there's weird situations where you have like a brick of chaff or something that's cheating, and they have crappy weapons. But
Right.
a couple of things to point out here is that Tyranofex acid spray goes from 6 to 8 strength,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually
That's
that's
great.
suddenly winning on twos.
Yeah, you're wounding.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
a brick of 3 Pyrovores is also strength 8, so it's strength 8 twin linked, which is also very good.
Mm-hmm.
And then a group of Termagants with Spine Fists, they're strength 3 to strength 5, and they have twin linked, which is really good. Suddenly
Mm-hmm.
they're wounding Marines in threes and they're re-rolling, which is, yeah, it's extremely good.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
there's like weird situations like that where even the smaller guns can hit those breakpoints and it really makes a big, big difference.
yeah, I mean, like literally, I don't think there's. I mean, it affects the littler guns more than the
Yeah,
big guns,
absolutely.
right? Because like, the Tyrannifex rupture cannon going to 20, like, yeah, that might help, versus I guess the if you're then you're wounding strength 10 on twos, sure, but like that isn't nearly as big a break point as like going from threes to fives. So all of a sudden, instead of wounding Marines on fives, you're wounding them on threes. Like that's very
Yeah.
big.
If you have 18 Termagants with Spine Fists, you got 36 attacks coming into a Marine unit. The difference is 10 dice. It's a big
It's
difference.
a big difference. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Moving on. Restorative impulse for 1 CP in your command phase. You can return a. You can bring a warrior back. Um, Not super useful a lot of the time. One time I think that the one situation where it becomes super important is that because this happens, it just says your command phase. So you
Yeah.
can do this before you are scoring primary. And
Yeah.
so you can use this in some circumstances to score a primary that you would not have otherwise. Either because you didn't have enough OC on it, and again, you're bringing back something with 3 OCs, so there's a lot of situations where that could be the difference between like being contested to, taking it, or if you are not actually on the objective, but you are close enough to it. I mean, basically within 2 inches of it. Um, the way that 10th works when you return models, they just have to be within coherency. They don't have to be where they died. Um, that's like the biggest one. The last one that like kind of maybe could come up is if like there's a huge charge that you really need to get off, you can cheat movement out of this. So this is, I mean, I think of all this because of like Necrons. This is like what we do, but
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Yeah.
it's exactly the same. But because like okay, what 50 millimeters is like an inch and a half, right? Roughly.
Yeah.
So, or is it closer to 2 inches
It's
actually?
2 inches.
Yeah, it's
It,
2 inches.
it's 25.4 millimeters is an
Yeah.
inch.
So you're essentially you could cheat 4 inches of movement out of this. So like that, if if
Yeah,
it
that's
it
it's
can
also a
be
trick with
significant.
the it's a trick with the warrior primes too because they move 12 whereas regular warriors move 6.
Right.
You
Yeah.
just put
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
warrior prime in the back, you leapfrog, and then you can
Yep.
regen
Yep.
you can regenerate, then you can stick one up there.
Yeah. So I mean,
So as long
like,
as you're still in coherency.
I think that this is one of those which, like, as a if you're like a beginner player, you might think, oh, that's amazing. But like, you have to remember that warriors are not that great in terms of points value, right? Like you're returning a what are they like 35 points a model or something?
It's 20 something. So
Oh,
it's
not
the
even.
range warriors are 65 for 3 and the
Oh, okay.
melee ones are
Okay,
75
so
for
a
25 points.
25 point model, right? Like that's a CP for a 25 point model in and of itself not great. Like you're not going to do this just cuz every turn. But when it comes up, if it's going to score you 5 victory points or guarantee, or at least, yeah, guarantee like a, or at least make possible a key charge. It's niche, but yeah, it can
Yeah,
be good.
it definitely matters a lot. I think this is one of the reasons why Invasion Fleet gets picked so much. I think
Yeah,
the regen strat in particular is extremely good, and I mean I've won a bunch of games just based on the strat. And so
yeah.
whether it's hiding behind a wall and then placing it on an objective during your command phase, in it, like by itself, so they can't be shot off, protecting yourself
Mm-hmm.
from the secondary, or any of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. I mean that all helps a lot.
Yep, absolutely. So, I think it's one that you maybe bank a CP and, in case, just, but like you don't expect to do it every game. The other thing is like what you can do is, and this is sort of like a bit of a mind game, is you can sort of lie by telling the truth. And, you tell your opponent, like, you just tell your opponent, hey, by the way, I can return one model. And so then they think, oh, gee golly willikers, I have to wipe that. I have to wipe that. I have to wipe that unit. And maybe they devote more resources than they might have otherwise, and maybe they lose some efficiency by having to do that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about efficiently allocating your resources. That's one
Mm-hmm.
of the ways that stacking auras like Feel No Pains and Stealth and -1 to hit a melee, all that, definitely your ability to calculate all that and figure out what you actually have to allocate is definitely what makes a player better than one
Yep.
another. So
Yep. Yeah. I mean, like, it's one of those things that sometimes the effectiveness of something can never. You never have to actually use the rule because just the threat of using the rule can make it effective.
for
This isn't,
sure, just like Overwatch.
yeah, this isn't like exactly. This isn't quite as strong as something like that, or like Grey Knights with the sigil of exigence, but it's
Yeah,
still it has its place.
for sure. I think it's very good.
Yeah. All right. Synaptic micronodes. In your movement phase, this is just a warrior's unit. Sticky objectives. Um, Always useful.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I'd say most non-Tyranid armies have it all over the place. It seems like everyone I play against has a sticky objective.
I
The
mean,
only
Necrons does, but it's with like the worst character in the
Yeah,
codex.
and I mean Tyranids does have it too in a different detachment, but it's
Right.
assimilation, which not a lot of people play. It is
Right.
a cool detachment, but it's pretty uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's again one of those things like, um, it's it's
It's a movement phase
it's a
sticky
movement
too, which is
phase
a
one,
little
which
less
is like
good.
a
Yeah,
little less good.
yeah, because you have
Um,
to actually be on it already.
you no, no, because it just says, it doesn't say the beginning of your movement phase.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is the really good ones are ones where you can
You can do it when you're shot
do
off.
right
Yeah,
away. Yeah,
yeah, that's like the World Eaters one. That's the best one because it
for
gives you
sure.
more
Yeah,
information. This is slightly better because it is. I mean, there are some which are command, like the ability is like command phase, right? Like if you have a unit that has it as an ability, it's in the command
yeah,
phase. That's the weakest one. The next is in the movement phase, which is so that you can move onto it and then sticky it. Um, So, I mean, I could see something like if you are facing a very like standoff shooty army, like um, guard or Tau, certain Tau builds, where you're like, I am going to sacrifice a 75 point, 3-man Tyranid Warriors unit. And I'm just gonna put them on the middle objective, and then I will sticky it, knowing that you're gonna shoot them off, but you have to then come out, or else I just keep scoring that middle objective. Like that can be pretty powerful into those armies.
yeah. I think so too. I think that's one of the ways that currently built Tyranid armies do things is because their lone ops are so good. They tend to do
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that to bait people into coming onto objectives, and then
Yep.
you either counter strike with your chargeables or you just shoot them with efficient shooting.
Yep. And another thing is, if you are playing a against somebody nowadays, I mean, everybody seems to have uppy downy or deep strike all over the place. But if you happen to be playing somebody who doesn't have any access to that, and doesn't put anything in deep strike, you can just sticky your home and then move more resources forward, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I mean obviously there's the rumor about the 3-inch deep strike change. I think that this becomes better if that changes too.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, even if it doesn't, like if somebody has a 9-inch deep strike, you still
Yeah,
don't want to, you know.
of course. And the cool thing is, I mean, obviously if you sticky home with like a group of ranged warriors, I mean that's 65 points that stands there for 1 second. So
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing. Um, so, for example, in the upcoming teams tournament that I'll be doing this Saturday, so the lists are up, and I was taking a look at the lists, and two players have their sister running sisters. One is running 3 exorcists, and one is running 2 exorcists. So that is long range, indirect, kill almost anything platforms,
yeah,
which is terribly annoying to deal with if you're trying to hold your home. One way to neutralize that is to just sticky your home. And
yeah,
so then they can't just, so like, yeah, because they're not trying necessarily to take it away from you, but if, or to like, actually hold it, but if they can just blow off whatever you have holding it, that is a big problem for you. But if you can sticky it, it's not a problem anymore.
yeah. And I think one of the ways that most Tyranid players deal with that usually is by just sticking a Biowar back there. But a Biowar just dies to that kind of indirect. Either
Yeah,
it takes a turn or two. But same thing with the regular infantry. I mean, indirect does kill chaff very easily. So leaving them, being able to stick it and then just run off and do stuff is actually nice.
I mean, yes, like, and the other solution, of course, is using a lone op, but then that's one more lone op that you can't put somewhere else more useful.
Exactly. And Tyranid lone ops especially like to be out in the front
Yeah,
killing stuff.
exactly. I mean, they're cheap enough that it's not like the end of the world if you have to leave one back there, but it's not ideal.
Yeah.
So again, useful strat. Any army would be perfectly any list would be perfectly happy to have decent access to sticky objectives. All right, moving right along. Parasitic payload in your shooting phase. Now this is just ranged warriors. Um, First, they ignore cover and then they strip cover, which is nice. A lot of the times, the thing that strips cover doesn't get to ignore cover itself.
Yeah, actually, I at first glance I thought this was kind of whatever because it was turn of warriors, but the fact of the matter is that you can give one of the warriors a venom cannon, which is 36-inch range, and you can give one of
Mm-hmm.
them a death spitter, which is also 36-inch range.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to remove cover from that far away is actually really good for your other guns.
I think you mean
Synergizing.
the Strangler is 36.
Strangler, yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those.
Yep. There's so many to keep track of. I
Yeah,
just
barb
happen to have
strangler and
pulled
flame
it up in
cannon.
front of me. I'm not an expert.
Yeah, death spitter's the 24-inch one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no. Normally, the other way to strip cover for Tyranids is to use Pyrovores, and they have a 12-inch range. They move 5, and they have a 50 millimeter base, so it kind of sucks. Or 60 millimeter base.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess like it's definitely a nice thing, especially because um outside of, I guess, rupture cannons, like everything else, the best you can do is like AP -3, right?
Well, Exocrines are AP3, and you see them everywhere because they're so efficient.
Right.
But actually, there's an awful lot of stuff that's AP2, which
Well, that
against
yeah,
like
that
Marines and stuff is hard because armor contempt and cover is bad.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, two is obviously even more susceptible, but even AP3 um, is if you're shooting at Terminators in cover with armor of contempt, AP3 still doesn't get you to the invul.
Yeah,
So like AP4 is like the magic breakpoint. Everybody, you always want at least AP4 because it will always take pretty much everything to its invul.
yeah,
And like AP4 will get a like, yeah, but because there's not, I mean, basically what I'm saying is Tyranids do not have a ton of high AP. Getting access to ignores cover is always nice. The question is, given that there are, I mean, we've just talked about how there are some other like great strats in this detachment. Is this something worth like really like relying on, or do you just take the Pyrovore?
I think that, I mean, the Pyrovore is okay in some situations. Where this does matter, and I actually kind of like it, is when you're shooting like a tank or whatever that's far away.
Mm-hmm.
If they're saving on sixes with cover, then versus not saving at all, it does make a kind of a significant difference. So,
Totally.
and I
Yeah.
think this kind of lends itself to. I mean, there's three things that you kind of want to combo together here, so it takes an awful lot of CP. You get like situations where you're doing go turn type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is okay, and not a lot of the detachments play that way, at least for Tyranids, um, at least the way I've played them before. But the fact that it's versatile is nice. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't necessarily use it all the time. It just is kind of there if you need to do it, type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question is like, do you take ranged warriors specific? Like, let's say you were building a list and you're like, I don't really want to take ranged warriors. I just want to take melee warriors. Would you think, but I should take at least one so that I could use this strat just in case?
I don't think I would do that. I think that I would just take one group of ranged warriors anyway, though,
Mm-hmm.
because they're 65 points and you can use them to sticky and then use them to move out and shoot
Right.
something and give it, remove cover.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, 65 points for nine wounds that has a 5 up invul is actually just sort of useful on its own.
Yeah, it's not bad. And I mean, nine wounds, it's nine OC. It's actually not horrible. I mean, it's relatively cheap for that. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, you really could MSU this, right? Because they're battle line now, so you could just take
exactly.
a lot of three mans. All right, now we're to the very last strat, another slightly complicated one. So your opponent's shooting phase after they've selected their targets. This one target a warrior's unit that was selected as that target. And then they say if that unit is a Tyranid, well, it is a Tyranid warriors unit because you can only target a Tyranid. But uh, you also do have to select an endless multitude unit. So this won't work unless you have both the endless multitude and the Tyranid warriors. The way this is written.
I think I think it actually works if it's just a Tyranny Warriors by itself, but it has the added benefit. It's like the first one, or if there's an endless
Oh
multitude
yeah, you're right.
nearby.
You're right because it says select up to one.
Yeah,
So you could just do warriors by themselves. Okay, warriors and potentially an endless multitude unit that is not battle shocked within 6 inches. Till the end of the phase, if the strength characteristic is higher than its toughness, -1 to wound. Um, for both potentially.
yeah. Now the one thing is that this obviously matters more on the endless multitude units because their toughness is lower,
Sure.
but you can't actually target the endless multitude unit with this. So if someone just picks the endless multitude to shoot at first, then you can't just do that.
Right, which is yeah,
I kind of hope maybe they'll FAQ it. Who knows? But it
maybe.
would be cool if they did.
Yeah, because that does seem easy enough to work around. Um, though I mean, warriors being toughness 5, but like enough wounds, yeah, I think it's reasonable that they will be targeted by higher strength things, not
Yeah,
infrequently.
I think this is a pretty good one. The minus one to wound is just good. It stacks with all the other stuff that you're gonna want to bring, whether it's stealth and feel no pains and everything. You
Mm-hmm.
start layering enough stuff, and you get the Swiss cheese effect where, stacked up enough Swiss cheese with holes in it, and eventually there's no holes anymore. So
Yeah, yeah. I think it's actually like a nicely rounded out suite of strats. Um, it's not like okay, so you have a defensive strat, you have some kind of mission play strats with like the sticky and the returning a model, and then you have two pretty like you have one very good shooting, one pretty good, and one okay like damage dealing strat. I mean that's to me that's a nice combination right there. Like
yeah, I think it's a pretty good mix.
yeah. So
I,
yeah,
I think that one thing that, I mean, at least in my experience, I obviously haven't played that long, and people have told me about previous editions with stratagems have been kind of strange. But I think
mm-hmm,
that with the way they have them set up now, some detachments are really carried by their stratagems, and some
right.
are not. I think this is a pretty good suite. I think this is actually the stratagems are definitely better than the rule as a whole, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I think that the strats, like, there's nothing. Well, okay, the one potentially mind blowing one is the +2 strength on shooting.
Yeah,
That that's a one of the better, because I mean effectively in many circumstances it's +2 to wound,
exactly.
which is enormous. So that in and of itself, like, if you just did that for 4 turns, I would say that's a perfectly reasonable strategy.
Exactly, yeah.
Um, but I mean, like there are some, you got some reasonable enhancements. The invul makes the whole thing also. The invul in the OC is kind of like, I actually, the thing about it is, when I compare this to the most immediate comparison that comes to mind is Green Tide, which is like, the Orcs detachment, which focused on boys, which said, okay, boys get a 5-up invul, um, and all the strats are just for boys. This isn't actually even as restrictive as that. You can use it for things other than boys, and um, but the the thing about that is, like, you weren't getting a well-rounded army out of that. A well-rounded list. You were getting just like people taking just enough bodies that you literally couldn't do anything about it. This feels like, okay, it's still going to be a well-rounded army. It's not going to only be warriors. There's no reason to run it only as warriors. I don't think that actually the buffs to the warriors are enough to make it so that you only want to take warriors. Uh, it's just giving you one more well-rounded option in the in the suite. Like, if you wanted to play invasion fleet and not have warriors, cool. Like, but this is a very similar style of not in necessarily the particular strats and enhancements, but like the style of mix of units that you're going to get. So I don't think this is just like a spam list.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that at least a lot of what I read right away, people were kind of they took a glance at it and they said they looked at the fact that it was keyworded like this and they said, ah, it's stupid. I don't think that's the way to play. You don't just run 72 warriors. As fun as that would be, maybe on TTS, um, it would be entertaining. I don't think that's the way to do this. That's a good stat check list for someone who can't do enough wounds, but I think doing a combined arms setup just like you would invasion fleet is the way to do this. Like we're talking about mixing in ways to keep your warriors alive
Mm-hmm.
and then using the strength stratagem and the ignore cover thing to have some really efficient shooting and then getting your warriors in to actually do their damage.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess obviously we won't know until well, I guess until you playtest it. Um, and I know you said you don't really have enough warriors currently to make it work. Uh, but
That was my first thought. I think
yeah,
that, like I said, I think with some like more combined arms, running it more like invasion is actually the way to go. And I think
yeah,
it's probably fine with just a few groups, basically, or two 6-mans and maybe a ranged, or three 6-mans and a ranged, or something.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I do still think you probably don't want to take more than one 6-man, and you give that one the advance in charge to be your,
Yeah,
like, your hammer. And again, what I think so the mistake that a lot of people make with advance in charge is they think, I get to turn one, just charge them. That's never a great idea. Instead, it allows you to hold the hammer a little bit further back to to give yourself more options on where you're going to bring it down. So I think because you have more ways to hide the further back in your deployment zone you are, and this gives you access to that while still being having a somewhat of a threat range.
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially on GW layouts, the with the 6-inch move and the giant base, I mean, that's the problem with using warriors as a hammer is
Yeah,
they almost always are, even if they're staged well, they're still have a really hard time getting into combo with stuff.
yeah, yeah. So I think probably you don't want two six mans because you're never hiding both. So you have the one, and then I think like you actually start with all of the shooting and utility pieces that you want to bring. You see how many points you have left over, and then you just fill it out with warriors after that.
Yeah, I think it kind of just takes the place of battle line,
Yep. I mean
and
that's
it does
literally it.
okay. I
It's
think the thing with this is that I mean, like because of that, it's going to be directly compared to Invasion Fleet, and Invasion Fleet is very good.
right.
So it's challenging to kind of push that around a little bit. I think there is some play here, but when compared directly to Invasion Fleet, Invasion, you're looking at targetable 5-up Feel No Pain.
Yeah.
You're
That
looking
which is
at
very nice. That is so
extremely nice.
nice.
You're looking at either lethals or sustained, which melee warriors, if they're paired with a guy, are going to have sustained already. So
Right.
if sustained lethals are one of those things in the game that I've that are actually kind of ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
especially on warriors. That's one of the things that warriors can do in invasion is they can basically just pick up any vehicle in the game,
Mm-hmm.
almost any vehicle in the game anyway. And you get crits on fives in that detachment as well, so that's in melee at least. So there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot of really good things in invasion that in a combined arms setup give you that versatility that you want. You can also regen battle line in invasion, but it's the multitude units, and you get a D3 plus 3, which is quite a few. That's up to 12 OC, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to. I can't think off the top of my head, but like, would you rather have your exocrines and all your shooting stuff? Well, the thing about the hyper adaptation though, right, is like you have to, like it's great into like if you're just facing a skew one way or another, and it's like okay, well it's obvious, but
Yeah,
if you're facing something that's well rounded, and you might have some difficulty choosing which one you want.
sometimes
Sometimes,
because
right? I
the
mean,
way that
usually
they
sustained is
change.
better than lethals almost
Yeah,
always.
almost always, and it's sustaining an infantry or swarm. But the big thing is that because hive tyrants bring a lethal aura, you can almost
Mm-hmm.
always make it so that you just pick sustained anyway. Unless
Right.
you're playing mounted like Wolf Jail, you'll just pick precision instead, which almost never happens. But if it does happen, it is pretty cool. But
Well, they do
with
have
this,
a
it
lot of
definitely,
characters usually.
yeah, exactly. With this, you definitely could be more well-rounded, and you still get the lethals from the hive tyrant. The sustain does matter, but wounding on twos with exocrines on terminators is actually it's basically the
Super
same
good.
thing. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I'm thinking like I actually think +2 strength is better than lethals,
Yeah, and I mean,
especially with access to reroll ones. Like
yeah,
that can be super reliable. Yeah, I mean I haven't again I'm not the expert but I think that like they're if it invasion fleet is probably better, but I don't think it's like so much better that it's like not worth ever running this as an
for sure.
alternative.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people wrote this one off, and I think I saw there was some Discord commentary today that I briefly glanced at about the Thousand Suns one that
Mm-hmm.
people are definitely just reading it quickly and writing it off instantly. There is some play just by what you're looking at. I mean, um, what's his name? Sam Pope. He's a Tyranid player. He's like
Yeah.
probably one of the best Tyranid players. I mean,
Right.
he won with Unending Swarm when it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
technically that good, I guess. He wasn't really ever killing anything. He was just using something different. And in Worlds, he went whatever it was. What did he place? I think he only lost twice, or maybe he had a tie and a loss. Um, and I mean, there's definitely play in these detachments. Not everything has to be the perfect meta. If you play well and use your things synergistically, you can set up situations where you efficiently trade all the time, and usually you can pull ahead with that. I mean, that comes about in like Magic, for instance, thinning your deck and knowing how to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
really optimizing your ability to take advantage of the efficiencies that you have can put you in situations where you're more often winning, and that's why people who are good keep winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons why strats can be particularly good over auras, because often in the course of the game you are required to put things in a position that maybe pulls things out of range of an aura, but you're always within range of a strat, assuming that you're not like dealing with a Calidus assassin or something. But if you're shooting, then that's probably not an issue. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, again, I think I'd have to see a lot more playtesting and get some data. But I think it's a good detachment. I actually really do, and I think that if you're somebody who like from a previous edition or just you have a lot of warriors and you love it, I think you can absolutely play this competitively.
yeah, I think so too. I think I was reading that people in ninth like had some warrior spam list that they did. So there's probably a lot of
Yep,
people out there who have them left over
absolutely.
and who would want to try it out. I think the people who are that meme about 72 warriors and it costs $1,700 to buy that. I think that's kind of silly. I don't think you would ever do that. But
No, no, I mean, because like literally, if I mean, just having the shooting benefits and the sticky stuff like is already like if somebody ran this and only had like 3 units of warriors, I'd still be like, yeah, sure, makes sense to me.
yeah, I think I mean, even if my current invasion fleet list, it doesn't really take much to like really adapt it to this,
No,
and it still would do very well
yeah,
because you're still looking at, really you're making extra guns more efficient, you're making your guns more efficient, and I like using warriors in invasion anyway. I mean, I do like them a lot, and
mm-hmm,
actually being able to connect with them more often would be helpful.
yeah,
And I mean, if you're basically just replacing your battle line with better battle line, it also is nice in that
right.
regard. So
I mean, yeah, that's the thing to remember is that like they may not be that hard to kill, but they are harder to kill than termagants and gargoyles.
yeah,
So, and then I mean, I guess the last thing that we always discuss is how fun it is, and I think that this one it seems super fun. I mean, if you love your warriors and you got them, like this, you could have tons of fun with this.
for sure. I think they're definitely a really fun unit to use. When they have the prime, when they have sustained, I mean, you're rolling an assload of dice, so it's like
Yeah,
it's always fun to do that. So, and when they actually connect and they connect really hard, which is super satisfying, of course.
yeah, and I mean, I don't know. To me, like Tyranid warriors are just like such an iconic 40k unit. Like,
Yeah, I
like,
it's funny. I remember when I was a kid. I mean, my break from 40K was from second edition to 10th now,
yep, me too.
and
Well, third.
second was like I'm sure you remember seeing them, but the Warriors back then were really ridiculous, and I
Oh
remember
yeah.
seeing them when I was a kid. I was like, oh, these are really cool actually, and they're definitely iconic. And when you look at any of the really good 40K art that's on covers or anything like that, you
Mm-hmm.
always see Warriors amongst Gaunts, which I think they tried to put in this with a couple of the strats. And I
Yeah,
think it does make it worth happening.
absolutely. Well, I hope someday to face you playing this. I
Yep,
think
I'll
it'll be
definitely
fun.
try it out.
I mean, even if it is just on TTS.
It might have to be, but I think maybe one more box for me and I could make it happen. We'll see.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I think this went really well. I also half wrote it off just by looking at it, and like I think I just had heard so much negativity, but going through it with you, I'm convinced. I'm a convert.
Yeah, I think that's it's something that happens a lot. I think in online discourse, everyone is quick to be mad about
Yeah,
everything instead of looking and seeing ways to make it work and solve the problems first. And if it's still bad, then yeah, it's bad.
sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again, and if you've made it this far, please like, comment, subscribe. Tell us how wrong or right we are in the comments. We will respond, and you can join our Discord, which I will link in the description. And thanks again, and have a good evening.
Thanks for having me.